Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the UCT Alumni Summer School Series. What is the new normal? The future scenarios. We are joined today by Clem Sunter, international futurist and scenario planner, and Professor Eddy Maloka from the Africa Peer Review Mechanism. Welcome to both of you, gentlemen. Before we get going, for those people not in Cape Town, it is a pretty wintry day. It was pretty wet. I hope wherever you are finding yourself, you are safe and doing the necessary social distancing and washing your hands when you go out, etc. And just keeping safe both yourselves and your family. We are at the moment living in very uncertain times, but at the same time with huge opportunities. And I think that speaks to today's session that we will be having around future scenarios and how people can use future scenarios to start creating this better future. And so very quickly before we start, just to touch on the whole concept of futures, because some people believe when they hear about futures and future studies, they see this crystal ball that futurists talk about. And I think I just want to say that up front, as futurists, we don't have a crystal ball. We do not predict the future. What we do is look at trends, we look at analysis. People like Clem have things that they call flags. And based on those things, we have various scenarios that come forth. And then based on those scenarios, you as an individual, you as an organization, you as a government can then make better informed decisions. Ultimately, it goes to you as an organization, you as an individual, starting to embrace this concept of futures and understanding that it's actually a field that you can study, and that the scenario planning that we do is actually a well-defined methodology, which someone like Clem Sunter has taken to a global level. And so we are very fortunate today to have Clem Sunter joining us. So to introduce the two speakers, everyone has received the invitation and you saw the formal introduction to both our speakers, but I thought I'd share some stuff about Clem that maybe a lot of people did not know, is that after 9/11, he received a phone call from the State Department, the US State Department, to find out from him that they've done this scan globally, and he was the only one that had a book talking about this terrorist attack on a global Western city, and they were very interested in his work, and so that took him in a certain direction. And then on the other side of the world, a very interesting thing also happening, that he was invited by the Central Party School, which is part of the Communist Party, to come speak to them in China, and that was in 2006 on the whole concept of scenario planning. And very interestingly, what they wanted to speak to him about was that they were very concerned with the US economy, because at that stage they had $1.5 trillion in US bonds. And so they wanted to understand from a scenario, from a future scenarios perspective, what are the possibilities of a recession in the US? And so, you know, Clem has this fantastic career across the globe and having dealt with governments across the globe. And then one very interesting thing also about him is that people don't necessarily know is that he is a musician, and that he was actually part of a rock band, and had his own rock band in the 60s. And very interestingly, in the 60s in Oxford, he actually shared a gig and shared a stage for the evening with the Rolling Stones. And so they were alternating the stage with the Rolling Stones, his band, and the Rolling Stones, and the next morning they shared breakfast and stuff. So a very interesting career, Clem. And maybe just to get the conversation going, we don't want to go into the whole concept of COVID, and there's a lot of information around COVID at the moment, and people are being bombarded with information. And so if we want to just step back from that and say, you know, for those people who are interested in those scenarios, that you can go and Google News 24 Clem Sunter, and you'll see the scenarios that he picked up with regard to the COVID, and talks about there were two scenarios we did. The one was at the beginning of March, which spoke about this much ado about nothing, which was the initial approach which the US took. But that was updated, I think, towards the end of April, Clem, where the second one was done, where you spoke about this walking the tightrope scenario. And so that's quite interesting to read, and I would really recommend people who have not yet read those articles to just Google that, News 24 Clem Sunter, and you'll read those articles, and he speaks about these different flags, the anti-establishment flag, the national debt flag, and how these things are affecting the future. But Clem, my question to you is around beyond those flags that you speak about and that people can read about. Post-COVID, there's this concept that you talk about, the shared destiny. And how do we as South Africans, take this opportunity of COVID, this global pandemic, this global crisis, to say, can we come together and co-create a shared destiny, a better future for our country and for our continent? Clem.
Well, thanks everybody for inviting me today. This is a golden opportunity because it normally requires a catastrophe of the scale that we have experienced with the coronavirus to think about completely new models. And the one flag which was flying high before the pandemic struck was what I call the anti-establishment flag around the world, where people are fed up with the rising level of inequality in society. There was a marvelous book written by Thomas Piketty, a French economist, called Capital in the 21st Century, where he showed that because the rate of return on capital and property has been much higher than economic growth recently, that the gap between the super rich and the middle class and poor has actually widened to where we were at the beginning of the last century in 1910, 1914. And this has created huge anger around the world. We're seeing it at the moment with the dreadful murder of George Floyd and the rise of Black Lives Matter in the world. That there's a real popular pushback against authority of all kinds. And here in South Africa, we have actually, I think, handled the epidemic extremely well. We've had incredible partnership between government and the private sector. We've had all kinds of initiatives taken in the townships to provide food and other things. So in a way, we haven't had that incredible division that you've seen in the rest of the world. So we must really build on that energy after the pandemic subsides, which hopefully will be in September, October, to look at a new economic model for this country. When I did the high road, low road scenarios in the 1980s, the high road of negotiation leading to a political settlement and the low road of confrontation leading to civil war in a wasteland, which were the Anglo scenarios for the 1990s for South Africa, very few people believed that we could take the high road and that the ANC would negotiate a new settlement with the National Party, but they did. But we always said that was only the first crossroads, the political crossroads. There was always the economic crossroads that we had to successfully negotiate, because we are a very, very unequal society, as we all know. And this is a very good moment to look at a new model in order to revive our economy. So what I would like to see is an economic CODESA, just like we had the political CODESA in the beginning of the 90s. I would like to see an economic CODESA, really looking in a very radical way at how we can provide millions of jobs, not only for those who were unemployed before the pandemic existed, but who've been made unemployment by the pandemic. Yes, we do have the National Development Plan. Yes, we do have, very senior committees with the president and CEOs getting together. But what I want to see is a kind of energetic, bottom-up kind of revolution of thinking about how we can create a much more inclusive economy. And the one flag that has been flying high for the last 20 years is around work. The nature of work has completely changed. In the last century, you just got educated, you got a good school qualifications, you got a university degree if you were lucky, and then you waved your CV in front of a large business with tens or hundreds of thousands of employees, and you got employed. That was the way to go. I mean, I remember when I was involved in the gold mining industry in the last century, you had 600,000 people employed in South Africa on our gold mines. And of course, that figure now is maybe 100,000, 150,000. There's just no way that you're ever going to see these huge figures again. So guess what the implication is of this flag? It's that the only way you're going to create millions of new jobs is to create millions of new businesses. And so we've got to go back to how we can really create an entrepreneurial spark in this country, how we can integrate the township economies into the mainstream economy, how we create, as I say, this bottom-up revolution in the major metropolitan areas of Johannesburg, Cape Town, Durban, and then obviously in the rural areas where people are trading with one another, they're selling things to one another, and the more successful businesses start selling elsewhere in South Africa, and the really successful businesses start selling overseas. Because we haven't got that. We've got rid of a political apartheid, but we haven't got rid of economic apartheid. And so we really do need to have a very fundamental conversation at grassroots level about how we can create this new economy. And then what you want is the provincial authorities and of course the government to provide the support systems so that the local economies get that kind of critical financial support and other support to do this. And one last point. If you look at the Japanese model, there's a very close relationship between big business and small business. They call it the dual logic economy there. And we very much need that. So I would want at least 20% of every supply chain of every large business to be dedicated to creating a new generation of entrepreneurs in small business. So other African countries are pursuing this model. Nigeria, absolutely. You go to Lagos, you will see everybody uses a device, because devices, modern devices, you do your marketing, your books, you contact customers through a smartphone and all this. So it's happening in the rest of Africa, and we've now got to make it happen here.
Thank you, Clem. Just another question for you before we go over to Prof. As futurists, we have been asked now during this pandemic period, why did people not see it? Is this a black swan? All these sort of comments coming. I was part of a global futurist summit in April, and a lot of the narrative there was, why did the decision makers not see this thing coming? Why were people not more prepared for it? And my response to them is, well, a lot of futurists did see it. In fact, you yourself had what you called the pandemic flag, which spoke exactly to this thing of global travel, of metro, big cities, etc., and the possibility of this global pandemic spreading quickly. And so I suppose the question to ourselves as futurists then is, how are we selling ourselves? Are we selling ourselves properly? And how do we make sure that the people who are the decision makers, both be it in corporate or in government, take or understand this whole field of futures in a very different way?
Yeah, that's a very difficult question to answer, because I've seen it so many times that the classical strategy model is all about having a vision and then getting everybody aligned to the vision, and then you have key performance indicators to measure progress towards the vision. That is what is taught in most business schools in America, the UK, elsewhere. And of course, it means that when you come along as a futurist with a future that is what Al Gore called an inconvenient truth because it conflicts with the vision, nobody really wants to listen to you. I mean, in the case of President Trump, he wanted an economy that was really growing strongly so that he would get re-elected in November, December this year. That was his vision. And so even though there were plenty of studies done in America prior to this pandemic hitting, nobody took any notice of them. And that's why you had those chaotic scenes in New York of nurses and doctors without proper apparel, masks. You had a shortage of ventilators and all these things, which if somebody had actually listened to those scenarios offered by medical experts in the last few years, they would have taken as much concern about public health as they would about defense, and, you know, having an army and nuclear weapons and so forth and so on. But it was an inconvenient truth, and it's something I've found when I've facilitated sessions for companies, is when you have a CEO who's very, very charismatic and has a very what I call hedgehog-like vision of the future. It's very difficult for other people, including you as an outside futurist, to basically say you've got to be more flexible. So it's work that's still got to be done in the futurist community to get the leaders to actually listen to what you're saying. When I did that with Chantal Ilbery, the book, The Mind of a Fox, we really wanted to get across that to look at the future as a leader, you've got to be a fox. You've got to have the sharp eyes, foresight, and the agility of a fox. And 2 years after we wrote our book, The Mind of a Fox, in 2001, Philip Tetlock, a professor in the United States who's one of the best futurists there, he wrote a report examining 28,000 forecasts of the future, and he used the metaphor of the fox and the hedgehog. And he said foxes capture the future much better than hedgehogs with their one forecast, because foxes have the flags, have the scenarios on a daily basis, examine whether the flags are going up or down, and then assign a probability to a scenario. And that changes maybe on a daily or monthly basis. That is the way you handle the future, but it's very difficult to get across to leaders who are stuck to a single vision.
Thanks, Clem, for that. And I suppose, you know, that is the challenge and the question to people watching this session today, people sitting in leadership positions, in corporations, in governments. You know, how much of a fox are they? And you know, all corporations that get set up will have a CEO, they will have a CFO, they will have an HR person. And we need to ask, do they have someone heading up their futures? You know, is there a chief futures officer? And if there's not a chief futures officer, then who is actually thinking about that futures? And so, yes, it is a challenging question, which brings us to Prof Maloka, who is dealing with these issues at a continental level. So just quickly to introduce Prof Maloka, welcome, Prof. I know you have quite a hectic schedule as well. Prof also plays an instrument, apparently. He's a classic guitarist, but apparently he was not part of a rock band and not part of a band, so he never shared the stage with the Rolling Stones. And he told me that he arrived in Cape Town a young man, but when he left with a long beard, so he spent a good part of his life here, and he ended up in diplomacy, in the diplomatic side by accident. which is interesting, part of Thabo Mbeki when Thabo Mbeki became president. So I think, Prof, for those people who don't know, Africa Peer Review Mechanism, part of the AU, probably one of the most influential organizations within the AU, if people do not know that. And why I say that is because this is leaders of the African continent saying, we want to review ourselves with regard to governance. And so if you think about it, because of this perception that we have of Africa and governance and corruption, and here you have African states coming together and saying that we want to be looking at the self-monitoring mechanism for Africa. And so it's quite unique, it's quite innovative approach to this concept of governance and defining governance. And so, you know, politics is not an easy space, and we live in the Western Cape, governed by a certain political party, which is different to a national government, and we see the severe politics that plays out. And here you have yourself having to deal with the whole continent and all these countries with all the different political parties. So I can imagine that it's quite an envious task that you have on hand. But I think I'm going to ask you the same question, Prof. I know you've taken, as CEO, the very bold step of saying the Africa Peer Review Mechanism is going to adopt a futures approach with your reporting. And so the report that you are going to put out is not going to be this backward-looking thing anymore. It's going to be saying we want a futures methodology embedded into the way we think, the way we do stuff, and we are going to co-create this new future. And so filtering that down, I think, into the different governments and states that you work with is not going to be an easy task, but you've taken on, I think, that challenge. And so in your mind, this shared destiny that I asked Clem about, you know, this shared destiny for Africa, how do you see that playing out post-COVID, and how do you see COVID maybe sending that into a different trajectory?
No, thank you very much for inviting me to be part of this dialogue, and thanks also to Clem for his very illuminating observations. Let me start by saying, yes, you know, the African Peer Review Mechanism, we are an entity of the African Union. We deploy teams to countries, we conduct country reviews of countries, and we write reports, and then the presidents, they defend their reports in meetings among themselves, but on peer basis. So we they give each other feedback, they advise each other, and we also monitor governance in Africa. So we're producing a report, the State of Africa Governance Report. We produced the first one, it went to the Assembly of the African Union. But as you say, Abbas, the second one, we decided we are going to focus on, we are going to take a futures perspective, look at governance. But at that time, that was before COVID-19. At the time, we're looking at, because the African Union has, we could say, a long-term plan, a 50-year plan called Agenda 2063. And for us, the issue was where we're looking at where Africa will be in Agenda 2063. We have all these broad strokes of where we should be. So we thought, let's look at the governance scenarios for 2063. So let's move away from the broad macro scenarios of environment, but rather focus of where will the African state be, and so on and so on. And so that's where we are. So when this incident happened, then we're in the middle of that. But I can tell you that myself, I'm not a futures expert or futures insider, but I've always been concerned and interested in the question of uncertainty as it pertains to history. And when this incident happened, I was actually, I asked myself the same question: why didn't we foresee this? And then I ended up battling with myself, and I wrote 4 newspaper articles dealing with different themes of the same. Why didn't we foresee this? From a policy point of view, and sitting at the African Union, we didn't foresee this. Even when this was unfolding in China, we had the summit at the African Union, nobody spoke about it. Even myself, I traveled through Addis Ababa, I didn't have any gloves, I didn't have, as this thing was happening, in February, as this thing was on its way from China. So really the issue for me, the shared destiny, I think Clem spoke about the economic dimension to it. For me is you could say the society dimension. I wrote something very short in the Daily Maverick, I think 1 week now, looking at how epoch-making events remap the world, societies, and so on. And I spoke about an aspect under the remapping of societies that these epoch-making events tend to reshape and remap societies. And I referred to the emergence that, they can lead to the emergence of new politics, but also the emergence of new social forces or the transformation of existing ones. And that was before the Black Lives Matter. So when I saw the Black Lives Matter, I said, you see, and the other point I made is that for this to happen, you don't necessarily need something to drop from the sky. You just need a trigger because all these things are happening within societies, and the pressure that this COVID-19 is putting on our societies, it needs a trigger to lead to the explosion of these social forces. And indeed, we see it happening. But for me, the big challenge posed this event, you could say, whether you call it an event or it's really the issue of how are we going to reestablish consensus within countries and also at the global level. Because within countries, I think Clem spoke about South Africa as one model, and in other countries, perhaps there are more challenges. You see, people can use the case of the United States, unfortunately, where there's serious and even violent contestation on how to deal with this virus and its effects on society, and people are demonstrating, and the police are being transformed now. And so the question is, and this is happening in the United States, it's happening in other countries. People are in the streets and people are demonstrating, people are fighting. In South Africa, people may be at home, they are angry, they have no money, they have no. So the question really that's going to confront our government here, the country, is that post this pandemic, what are we going to say or do for that taxi driver who has lost his job, for that hairdresser who no longer has income? Now she must sleep. Already it's happening. Businesses are going to close down, etc., etc., etc. How do you re-energize society and try to re-establish consensus or a new national consensus? And at the international level, the WHO is under attack, but not by all countries, but of course by the most powerful country in the world. And the little, you could say, I could say the little now, the little consensus we had globally after the end of the Cold War, with a more stronger drive towards multilateralism, and people were talking about the reforms of the United Nations, the expansion of the Security Council. All these issues now are off the table. And the WHO is under attack. Even the leadership of the WHO is under attack. So we're really also going to need to re-establish consensus at the international level. You can say that Eddy is conservative, he's an establishment person, why is he talking about consensus? But from a policy point of view, till it states you need consensus. Even if you have forces that are in conflict, if you take a Marxist point of view, you say there are classes, the bourgeoisie, the working class or the proletariat, they are inherently in conflict. But you need to be able to lead society in a way that there is some basic, if you use a classical political science theory, you talk of social contract. So we need to re-establish this consensus that keeps states together, that keeps people away from the streets, that makes people to have confidence in national institutions, using laws and to address their grievances, the unions to going into the dispute resolution mechanisms if they feel they are not being so you need to re-establish and to rebuild this national consensus at the country level and also at the international level. And I think for me, it could stand on four pillars. The first one is solidarity. I think already the president has started it, and how you sustain it is going to be a big thing. A lot of people have lost jobs, and the poor are hit hard or have been hit hard by this pandemic. We need a consensus that is built and very strong element of solidarity, supporting and providing support to the most vulnerable, those who have been hit hard and so on. But you're going to need, which is the second one, you're going to need an element of sacrifice. There are certain things that personally I must be prepared to sacrifice. Already I've sacrificed, I'm not going to job, I'm losing certain things, I can't walk freely. So in order for society, and then I don't know what you think there because you guys are futurists, but historians, if you look at societies that do better in the future have had a moment is because they've had a moment in the past where they had collectively to sacrifice or to endure some serious experience that leads a particular generation to sacrifice for the future. So the question of the extent to which we who are alive today will be willing to sacrifice certain things in order to make sure that South Africa in the next decades becomes a better country, because certainly we are not going to be able to have everything because this pandemic has taken away from us. The third element, of course, is the cultural or the value issue. You could call it the Ubuntu, you could call it the social cohesion. And I think for me, trying to build on that, to build or reestablish this consensus for me is going to be key. And finally, of course, without sounding like a securocrat, I think the issue of stability is quite key. You need stability in society. I mean, I work on the African continent. I see how conflict, can be such a destructive force in society, no matter how justified is your cause. But sometimes you find you don't have an alternative, you don't have an option, you have to resort to conflict. That's what happened to us here in South Africa. But if we can be able to avoid conflict and be able to create a stable society, I think for me, that will be a key component of the consensus we need to reestablish post this conflict. So really for me, the shared future, it should be really about reestablishing and rebuilding this consensus that unfortunately has been shattered by the impact of this virus on the international system and also within countries, and hitting very hard some social groups, very vulnerable social groups.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that response. Just a very quick question for you. You mentioned that you're not a futurist, and I suppose the appeal to you as someone in a very influential position within the AU and in contact in those circles of decision makers is that we see you as our champion to drive this agenda of futurists within the AU. And I'm sure you are up to that challenge because you have, as an organization, already taken on that task to embed that into your organization. And I just want to get your confirmation that we have your support for that.
No, indeed, of course. And let me say the question that you asked, Clem, about why did we miss it? I mean, I've been thinking about it in my work situation, but also intellectually, how did we miss it? I think quite a number of reasons. I think some of which were touched by Clem. But the problem with this is that we have two regimes on the continent, even at country level, even here in South Africa. You have what you call the public health track, that deals with Ebola, etc., etc. So our public health, you could say, regime on the African continent is quite influenced quite a lot by HIV and AIDS and so, but also by the Ebola epidemic. And so we have that kind of a lot of work that we've been doing around public health, even within the African Union. Then you have another track, which emanates from the United Nations around disaster risk reduction, the DRR track. The disaster risk reduction track on the continent, when we are thinking about the disaster, we're thinking of floods and droughts. Yet the disaster profile of our continent includes and has infectious diseases as number 2 challenge. And you see the same thing is happening in South Africa. The legislation which was used by government to respond to COVID-19 is the National Disaster Act. It's not, they didn't use the International Health Regulation Act. So when you look at that judgment that came out about a week ago on the regulations 3 and 4 that invalidated, it's really around that. Why did you choose the National Disaster Act and not choose the International Health Regulation Act? And of course, the judge agreed with the minister. But the question is that we have these two tracks running parallel to each other. They are not integrated. So you have the national disaster people, they have national disaster agencies at the country level, strategy, staff, personnel, budget, but they are planning, and they are here in South Africa. We are planning anyway, we're looking for a flood, waiting for flood, waiting for drought. We're not waiting for an infectious disease. Whereas on the other hand, the public health system is oriented towards HIV and AIDS, TB, and so on and so on. So is this disjuncture in our system that we needed the two to be together? So now at the APRM, we now realize that what you need to be working on, what you need to be focusing on as part of the APRM work, of course, we still focus on the traditional themes, development, peace and security, democracy, and so on. But now we say now we should now give more attention to state resilience, but using the disaster reduction, risk reduction approach. So you look at your vulnerabilities, so you attend to your vulnerabilities, you reduce the risk. So if you are a person like me, I go to my doctor, I eat healthy, I sleep enough, and so on. So I reduce I attend to my vulnerabilities and I reduce the risk. So I'm less likely. So we need to put more work and integrate these two streams of work. And that's what we are already trying to do here at the APRM. We are working with the Center for Disease Control of the African Union. Is the one that leads the public health response. But we're also trying to get hold of colleagues who are responsible for the DRR component of the work. They are not organizing major meetings like the CDC and so on, because the issue is that our disaster response doctrine, not just on the continent, globally, is informed or is based or is premised on droughts, floods, and so on as our primary and key disaster events for which we should prepare ourselves. So now we have been proven wrong. So if you are a futurist, you know we have been proven wrong that actually the floods, yes, they happen, the droughts, yes, they happen, but they are not as catastrophic as an infectious disease in this case. So really now it means that we don't have to prepare ourselves for an infectious disease specifically or for drought specifically, but we must prepare ourselves for any type of disaster that can confront humanity. So that's really where I think a lot of work has to go into. But already we have the tools, we have the instruments, I like the DRR methodology, I think it's quite, so we need really to invest in it and really revisit our planning. Here in South Africa, for example, we need to go into our the Disaster Management Act, the institutions and so on, and integrate it with different, not just public health, also other areas that potentially could contain emergencies or lead to emergencies for our own country. We should not be one-dimensional and think of disaster only as drought and flood and fire and so on. And also, of course, those are disasters, but it shows this COVID-19 has shown that we need to go beyond that and be more strategic in how we think or we make projections about future disasters.
Thank you, Prof. There's that into it. So, gentlemen, we got a lot of questions. There's more than 400 people logged online, so we are unfortunately not going to be able to get to everyone's questions. The administrators are sending through a few questions, so I'm going to fire off maybe 2 questions to you first, Clem, and you can answer that, and then I'll get 2 questions for Prof. So the first one here is, how will the growing tensions between China and the US affect South Africa's new norm? And then the second question, post-COVID, will corporate strategy require more consultation with futurists than before? Your mic, Clem. Okay.
So there we go. You know, on this question of tensions between China and the US, they were growing beforehand, as we know, with the trade spat. China's economic growth rate is actually slowing down because it's becoming a middle-aged society because of the one-child policy, which obviously has now been put into a 2-child policy. The fact is that just as Britain century was the 19th, America was the 20th, in about 10 to 15 years, China is going to overtake America to become the largest economy in the world. And so this will ultimately be China's century. And that's a real change in the game, because the West has basically dominated the world for the last 300 years. And yeah, China is going to be number one. And you know, having been there and talked to the principal strategists of the party at the Central Party School, I can tell you right now that, you know, they have a very different thinking about the world in many ways to Americans. So there's a sort of natural tendency to diverge. And as the Prof rightly said, you know, you need social cohesion, you need integration. But you know, you actually do have two nations with very, very different cultures. As far as South Africa is concerned, in this kind of rivalry between China and America, we do belong to BRICS. We've got Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa together. And I mean, that is a very important team to be a member of, because India is not that far behind China. Russia's still got a way to go, and so is Brazil. But for us to be in that team, you know, clearly puts us in a Premier League team of the future, as opposed to looking back at the past, where you had Europe, Britain, America as the dominant teams. So I think we obviously should very much be part of the BRICS team, but please, the one thing we shouldn't do is obviously anything which denies us support and cooperation and trade with Europe and America and others. That there's no excuse to start doing unreasonable things. On the second question, you know, of futurists, now I don't know how we're going to break the mold on this one, having been in the game for so long. And I can only think that the current crisis is actually broken, you know, broken a lot of basic assumptions about life. And as I often say, the reason I look at flags is because I regard them as the needles that can prick the bubble of emotion that most of us have when we look at the future. And if we can get agreement on what the flags are that are changing the global game, that will begin to get people to adjust their basic strategies. So yeah, it's tough, but I think a real catastrophe like we've had with the coronavirus is going to bring in new kinds of thinking everywhere in the world, because, you know, once we get back to survival, you really do start thinking in a new way. As they say, necessity is the mother of invention.
Thanks, Clem. Absolutely. And I think, again, you know, we sit with this challenge of in the future space that we view things through the present time that we live in. And so when we start talking about trying to think about the future that we haven't yet envisaged, it becomes very difficult. And so most corporates then resort to the traditional way of doing things. And we have a very good financial system in South Africa, very good CAs, etc. And we need to put that same sort of importance that we put onto these people that can bring this future lens into the boardrooms of South Africa and help organizations to shape a better future. And so hopefully there's people that's listening to this session today to get them thinking differently about their organizations and how do they embed and embrace futures into their organizations.
Can I just say one thing, Eddie? About what Eddie said, which is absolutely right, which is because the virus was in a different universe to, you know, droughts and fires and floods, and you had the sort of channel of HIV and Ebola on the one side, and you had these other things on the other. That is so true about business, that when you have a real risk threat which is outside the conventional world, you ignore it. And I mean, when I saw the shutdown of the world economy, you know, all those empty cities, no sports events, it's unimaginable that a little virus could cause that. But that's why it is such a huge risk to business. And you've got to actually have 360-degree thinking in terms of all the threats that you face, rather than just sort of, you know, going down separate channels. Couldn't agree more on that particular point.
Absolutely, and basing our budgets on last year's numbers. Yeah. Prof, got two questions for you. Does the worldwide uprising against authority speak to a need for a completely new political system and new inclusive economies? And then the second one, is there still a relevance for the narrative of an African Renaissance?
Of course, I think it's actually even more. I'm going to say something. I think the African Renaissance is basically about us African people that, we should get our act together and try to sort out the problems on the continent and be on par with other regions of the world. So we want, like what Clem was saying about China, if China is going to be overtaking certain parts of the world or certain regions in the next 10 years or so, we also want Africa to be, one day Africa, to be at that level where we are able to address massive levels of poverty in China. Look what they have achieved since Deng Xiaoping's time, since the 1970s. So really the African Renaissance is not about Africa being on its own. It's really addressing and taking responsibility for our own problem and not crying and hoping that somebody will bring us our solutions. But the issue also that I was really interested in, the second question, which was raised to address to Clem, about whether with this pandemic decision makers we will see more cooperation and collaboration between decision makers and futurists. I was asking myself, and it's probably a rhetorical question, if you go to a Sangoma for a charm because you want to get married to some, and then you give it to this lady and you execute it, administer it as directed, and then instead she falls in love for somebody else and with somebody else and starts rejecting you. So will you go back to that Sangoma? So of course you go and try something else. So the question is that it's not only governments who could not foresee this, but even futurists. Even infectious disease specialists. I looked at the literature and there were experts writing and say that we will not see any epidemic like the one of 1918. It's for the last time that the world will encounter such an epidemic. We've got enough controls, we've got biotechnological responses, and so there were even experts who were saying this will not. So it's not just decision makers, it's also, so it's and then I don't know, maybe decision makers will say futurists are useless, they couldn't foretell us, they couldn't, you say we don't have the magic ball, they couldn't help us, so we may as well try to look for solutions as well. But I think it's going to be a bigger challenge. And on the issue of China-South Africa relations, I agree with him with what Clem said. I work in South African foreign policy, and I can tell you that at the time when we deal with this, because this tension is not new, South Africa always, of course, deals with we pursue, at that time, I'm no longer a South African diplomat, pursue an independent foreign policy. So we don't have any hostile relations with anybody. We don't disagree with the Americans on everything. There are areas where we work with them, and then China as well, we work together. So when you have two powers at loggerheads, maybe where the grass that will suffer, I don't know. It's for time to tell. But South Africa, as he says, will continue to pursue its independent foreign policy. I don't think that changing, and that independent foreign policies, it will be multifaceted, working with the BRICS, but also recognizing the US as a power and continuing to work constructively with the Americans. We do have a bilateral mechanism with the Americans, so we used to utilize it to deal with the issues. And China we have a much more comprehensive bilateral mechanism with China. Even a plan of action is quite comprehensive package of relations with China, much more than with our American friends. But the issue that we are raising about new political system, new political movement, includes, of course, I think you can see that it goes back to the issue of vulnerabilities. How do you address your health risk? You address by health risk by eating healthy and waking up on time, gymming, and all those kind of things. So the threats to our society, the vulnerabilities to our society is really the inequalities that we find in the exclusions, the poverty. We have to address those in order to minimize our vulnerabilities and exposure to risk in the future. So we really have to, so it's important that we have and work towards more inclusive societies, more inclusive political system, because it's those risks, those vulnerabilities that creates more risk for our societies.
Thank you, Prof. Clem, I'm going to pose a short question to you, but it might be a long answer. The question is, what will the new normal in South Africa be?
Yeah, well, you know, there's, if you're a scenario player, you can say there are probably 4 or 5 possibilities, but I don't want to spend too much time on the ones that I don't feel will do us good. And for me, the new normal in South Africa, as Eddie quite rightly said, all those people who've lost their jobs as taxi drivers and everything else, the new normal is that we look at ways to actually resuscitate all those people who've been laid off by the coronavirus in a series of new businesses around the country which are created locally. So I would like to see, for example, Cape Town, you know, with a really strong initiative with Khayelitsha and Langer and everywhere else, you know, to have a sort of integrated economy where, you know, people can open up as entrepreneurs their businesses and not just satisfy a local community need. They can go right across the province. We should have an e-stock exchange where it's like eBay. You can actually put your business on the website and you can ask for capital. And people who live nearby can come and look at your business, and then you can put up capital. You know, we've got to look at all these things. And getting back to Eddie's point, which was the question about inclusivity and whether this coronavirus will and the new movements like Black Lives Matter will create greater inclusive politics. I go back to the original expression democracy, demos kratos, people power. You know, the ancient Greeks actually thought of that. and yeah, we've gone way far distant from people power in the world because we've got a very unequal world. We have very few companies, you know, with a lot of control. And I'm afraid to say the coronavirus has just made them even more powerful. You only have to look at the big digital 5 in America, like Facebook and Amazon and Microsoft and others. Their power has increased exponentially as a result of this pandemic. So, you know, we have the exact opposite of what people were talking about when they talked to demos kratos. And so, yeah, we need to get back to a new normal, which is in fact the historic normal, that if you want a successful society, you've actually got to give people power. And it's not by having committees on high, you know, coming out with directives for all the people down there. It's about really empowering those people to be, you know, to be entrepreneurs, to be bosses of their own life. I did a debate with Julius Malema 4 years ago at the Cape Sun, and I said to him, I am as much of an economic freedom fighter as you are, Julius. It's just that my definition of economic freedom is different to yours. I believe that real economic freedom is setting up a society in which everybody obviously has a decent education so that they can fulfill their potential, but secondly, has the freedom to pursue life in an entrepreneurial way. And we haven't got that in South Africa. And that's what we need to have a basic conversation about.
Thank you, Clem. One last question for you, Prof. What are the major structural changes the South African government need to implement to narrow the gap between rich and poor to avoid unrest?
Well, I don't want to say revolution because, you know, I work for the African Union. And we don't comment that much on the internal affairs of countries. Otherwise, they are my employers, my brother. Otherwise, you know, I'll come and try to get my job back at UCT. But all I can tell you now is that we will be undertaking a country review, APRM country review of South Africa. And I look forward to Abbas, to interacting with you, and also Clem, I like your ideas and your wisdom, and it will be very important that South Africans can benefit from your wisdom, and also from your futurist insight. Abbas, I'm going to advise my South African colleagues here. And in this IPRM country review process of South Africa that was supposed to have kicked off by now, but it was delayed, is going actually to address this issue, because South Africa won't be able to deal with the challenges facing it without addressing the very same issues related to poverty. Because the IPRM did a review of South Africa in 2006 and found that South Africa is one of the most unequal societies in the world, and also predicted what we now call later incidents of xenophobic violence and so on. So we're going to go through that exercise to look at to the extent to which South Africa has managed to address what the recommendation that came out of the previous report. And then now we'll also there will be an exercise looking at the new issues, what are the new, and so on and so on. And I'm hopeful that review will unearth these issues, and we'll also be able to help South Africans answer the question that we have just posed, the extent to which or what structural transformation that the country needs to address the inequalities. But I appreciate and I like the debate that Glenn had with Julius Malema, that both of them are economic freedom fighters. But it's very interesting that the concept that is in the minds of the two, what economic freedom fighting is about, what economic freedom is about. So this is really a South African conversation. But I think that cosmetic solutions to society's problems are not a long-term solution. You give this and that, and so on, so on, and so on. Really, the crux, the key to finding a lasting solution to societies is addressing the structural issues. So in our case, the structural issues around race and class and gender, of course, and you could say even in certain settings, even ethnicity. So you find these structural issues manifested in how power is distributed, how the resources of the country are shared, ownership patterns, etc., etc. And perhaps the lesson to learn from this is that perhaps going into a political routine of doing this and then maybe building this and house there and so on, perhaps it's important, but perhaps we need to inject more ambition in addressing the fundamental challenges facing this great country of ours. And I want to go back to what I was saying earlier, to say that perhaps we don't have to go to King Solomon to look for wisdom. Just go to Discovery Healthcare. What are they doing to cut the cost and to make sure they don't spend money on us going to hospital? They have provided us with vitality care. Go to the gym. So we need all of that for our society. We need a vitality care for our society to make sure that we reduce the risks and we also address the vulnerabilities facing our own countries. And the vulnerabilities, as I said, key to them is really addressing the structural issues.
Thank you very much, Prof. I think we got 2 minutes left, so we're going to wrap up. Firstly, to you two gentlemen, thank you very much. It's been a wonderful engagement.
Thank you.
I look forward to many more discussions with both of you. And I think we have a really exciting opportunity. And as the saying goes, let's not this opportunity go to waste. From my side, there's been a lot of questions, and I must apologize that we couldn't get to everyone's questions. Unfortunately, there were a lot of questions around this whole concept of futures. How can people invest in futures? How can they find out more? And I think I will be pushing quite hard with UCT for us to maybe start a online program that we run around futures and invite interesting guests like yourselves to come and share your thoughts, and maybe that becomes a ongoing initiative from UCT. So I will take that up with. Yeah,
but Abbas, I think you can also host one of the sessions that for the work that we are doing on the Africa Governance Report 2063. It's a futures. So we have an ongoing exercise. So we'll be more than happy to collaborate. So we can communicate offline and see how. And then of course we'll benefit a lot also from Clem's wisdom in this regard.
Yes, it'll be an honor. And then I think lastly, I've been told that I need to thank Standard Bank for sponsoring today's event. They came to the party and made this event possible. So thank you very much to Standard Bank for sponsoring today. I hope everyone enjoyed the session, enjoyed the discussion. Like I said, we really apologize not to be able to get to all the questions. I've been told there were more than 400 people online. But we will be recording this, editing it, and it will be put online, I think, in the very near future. Thank you very much for joining us there. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Prof.
Thank you.
And please stay safe and look after yourself, look after your family.
God bless. God bless.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, my brother. So my regards. Thank you.
And may the fox be with you.
May the fox be with you.